They mocked Clara Brennan for sleeping in the Hendersons' barn like a common drifter. But when railroad gunmen rode into town threatening everything she'd grown to love, the mysterious cowboy Jacob Reeves made a declaration that would change her life forever. Could a woman who'd been cast out as worthless become the key to saving an entire community and finally find the home her heart had been searching for? The rooster's crow pierced the cold Kansas dawn like a gunshot, jolting Clara Brennan awake on her pile of hay in the barn. October frost covered the wooden walls like tiny diamonds, and her breath came out in small white clouds as she sat up, shivering. The autumn of 1867 had been the hardest 3 months of her life, sleeping in this freezing barn while the Henderson family enjoyed their warm beds just 50 yards away. Clara's fingers found the brass compass hanging from a worn leather cord around her neck. The metal felt like ice against her skin, but she held it anyway. It had been her father's, the only thing she had left of him after the fever took him last spring. The compass needle always pointed north, steady and true, even when everything else in her life had fallen apart. From the main house came the sound of breakfast cooking. The smell of bacon and fresh biscuits drifted across the yard, making her stomach growl with hunger. Mrs. Henderson would give her the leftover scraps later, along with another lecture about being grateful for what she had. Clara stood and brushed the hay from her worn brown dress. The fabric had holes in 3 places, and the sleeves were too short for her arms. She'd grown taller this summer, but there was no money for new clothes. There was never money for anything. The barn door creaked as she pushed it open. Outside, the world was painted in shades of gold and orange. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the dirt road that led to town and the Hendersons' farmhouse with its white painted walls and red roof. Smoke curled from the chimney, a sign of the warmth and comfort that would never be hers. Clara walked to the well in the center of the yard. The wooden bucket was covered with a thin layer of ice that she had to break with her finger. The water was so cold it made her teeth ache, but she splashed it on her face anyway. She needed to wake up. There was work to do. "Clara!" Mrs. Henderson's voice rang out sharp and angry from the porch. "What are you doing standing around? Those chickens won't feed themselves." The woman stood in the doorway wearing a clean blue dress and white apron. Her gray hair was pinned up neat and tidy, and her face wore the same sour expression it had worn every day for 3 months. Behind her, Clara could see Mr. Henderson sitting at the kitchen table, reading a newspaper by the light of an oil lamp. "Yes, ma'am," Clara called back, hurrying toward the chicken coop. Her bare feet were already numb from the cold ground, but she didn't dare complain. She was lucky to have a place to sleep at all, even if it was in a barn. That's what Mrs. Henderson reminded her every day. The chickens clucked and flapped their wings as Clara scattered corn from a tin bucket. These birds ate better than she did most days. They had a warm coop and plenty of food, while she survived on table scraps and whatever vegetables she could find in the garden. As she worked, Clara's mind wandered to the survey maps she'd found in Mr. Henderson's office last week. She'd been cleaning when she noticed the papers spread across his desk. The maps showed property lines and land measurements, with notes about something called the Kansas Pacific Railroad. She'd studied them for as long as she dared, memorizing the details before Mrs. Henderson caught her. The maps had given her an idea, a dangerous idea that could change everything or get her thrown out with nowhere to go. But as she looked at the barn where she'd spent so many cold nights, Clara wondered if taking a risk might be better than staying safe and miserable. "Clara," Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through her thoughts. "Stop daydreaming and get to work on the laundry. And make sure you hang it where decent folks won't have to look at your raggedy clothes next to ours." Clara nodded and picked up the laundry basket. The wet clothes were heavy and cold, and her hands were already red and raw from the icy water. But she hung each piece carefully on the line, making sure the Henderson family's nice clothes were separated from her own few belongings. As she worked, Clara noticed a rider approaching on the road from town. The man sat tall in his saddle, and even from a distance, she could see he was no ordinary traveler. Something about the way he moved, the way he sat his horse, made her heart beat faster. The rider was getting closer now, and Clara could see he was young, maybe 25 or so. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, and a rifle hung from his saddle. But it was his hands that caught her attention. They were gentle on the reins, steady and sure. These were the hands of a man who knew how to handle himself. Wonder what he wants, Clara whispered to herself, hanging up the last of the laundry. Strangers didn't often come to the Henderson place unless they were looking for something specific, and the way this man rode, with purpose and determination, told her he wasn't just passing through. The rider reached the front gate and dismounted. Clara tried to look busy with her chores, but she kept glancing in his direction. There was something about him that made her feel curious and nervous at the same time. Something that told her this ordinary morning was about to become anything but ordinary. "Morning," the stranger called out to Mr. Henderson, who had appeared on the porch. "I'm looking for work. Heard you might need a hand around here." Clara's heart jumped. A new worker meant change, and change was something she'd been praying for. But it also meant another person who might look at her with the same disgust she saw in the Hendersons' eyes every day. Another person who would know she was just the girl who slept in the barn. She finished hanging the laundry and started toward the house. But something made her stop. The stranger was looking in her direction, and when their eyes met across the yard, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt seen. Not judged or pitied, but actually seen, as if she mattered. The feeling scared her more than anything else that had happened since her father died. "Ma'am, you dropped this." Clara spun around, her heart hammering like a frightened rabbit. The stranger stood just 3 feet away, holding something in his outstretched hand. How had he moved so quietly? She'd been so lost in her own thoughts that she hadn't heard him approach. In his palm lay her father's compass, its brass surface catching the morning light. The leather cord must have broken when she bent over to pick up the laundry basket. Clara's hand flew to her throat, confirming what she already knew. The compass was gone. "Oh no," she whispered, staring at the precious object. I didn't even notice." The stranger's eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and deep. When he smiled, tiny lines appeared at the corners, as if he'd spent years squinting into the sun. His face was weathered and tanned, but there was kindness in his expression that made Clara's breath catch. "Must be important to you," he said, his voice soft and gentle. "The way you're looking at it." Clara reached out with trembling fingers to take the compass. When her hand accidentally brushed his, she felt a jolt of something warm and electric. She pulled back quickly, clutching the compass to her chest. "It was my father's," she said, surprised by her own honesty. She never talked about her father, not to anyone. He died last spring." The stranger's expression grew serious. "I'm sorry for your loss. A man's compass is usually his most trusted possession. Means he trusted you with something mighty important." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. No one had talked about her father with such respect since he died. The people in town had whispered about how he'd left her with nothing, how she'd become a burden on decent folks. But this stranger spoke as if her father had been a good man worth remembering. "I'm Jacob Reeves," the man said, touching the brim of his hat. "I was just talking to Mr. Henderson about work. Seems like you folks could use an extra hand around here." "Clara," she said, then immediately wished she hadn't. Giving her name felt too personal, too forward. "Clara Brennan." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Brennan." Jacob's smile was warm and genuine. "That's a pretty name. Fits you." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. No one had ever called her pretty, not even her father. She looked down at her worn dress and broken shoes, wondering if Jacob was making fun of her. But when she glanced up at his face, she saw only honesty. "Clara!" Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. "Get away from there and tend to your chores. We don't need any more strays hanging around here." The word strays hit Clara like a physical blow. She took a step back from Jacob, her face burning with shame. Of course Mrs. Henderson would call her a stray in front of this stranger. Of course she would make sure he knew exactly what Clara was worth. Jacob's jaw tightened, and something dangerous flashed in his gray eyes. He turned toward the house, but Clara grabbed his arm without thinking. "Don't," she whispered. "Please. It'll only make things worse for me." Jacob looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. The anger in his eyes softened into something that looked almost like pain. "She shouldn't talk to you like that." "She's not wrong," Clara said, dropping her hand. "I am a stray. I sleep in their barn and eat their scraps. I don't have anywhere else to go." "That doesn't make you worth any less than anyone else," Jacob said firmly. "Your worth isn't decided by where you sleep or what you eat. It's decided by who you are inside." Clara stared at him, shocked by his words. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever suggested that she might be worth something just because she existed. "I have to go," she said quietly. "Mrs. Henderson gets angry when I talk to strangers." "I won't be a stranger much longer," Jacob said with a slight smile. "Looks like Mr. Henderson just hired me. I'll be working here from now on." Clara's heart did a little flip. Jacob would be staying. She'd see him every day, hear his voice, maybe even talk to him again. The thought terrified and thrilled her at the same time. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, then immediately regretted the question. It sounded too personal, too forward. "Mr. Henderson's got a small room in the barn," Jacob said. "Nothing fancy, but it's got a roof and 4 walls. That's more than I've had in some places." The barn. Jacob would be sleeping in the same building where she made her bed every night. The thought made her stomach flutter with nervous excitement. She'd have to be extra careful, extra quiet. She couldn't let him see her ragged nightgown or hear her crying when she thought no one was listening. "Clara," Mrs. Henderson's voice was getting closer. "Don't make me come over there. I really have to go," Clara said, backing away from Jacob. "Thank you for finding my compass. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost it." "You would have found another way to remember him," Jacob said gently. "Love doesn't need objects to survive. It lives in here." He touched his chest, over his heart. Clara ran toward the house, her face hot and her mind spinning. Jacob's words echoed in her head as she grabbed the broom and started sweeping the porch. No one had ever talked to her about love before. No one had ever suggested that her feelings mattered or that her memories were worth keeping. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, her face pinched with disapproval. "What were you doing talking to that man?" "Nothing, ma'am," Clara said, keeping her eyes on the wooden planks of the porch. "He found something I dropped." "Well, you stay away from him. Men like that are nothing but trouble, and you've got enough problems without adding to them." Mrs. Henderson's voice was sharp with warning. "You remember your place, Clara Brennan? You're here because we're Christian people, not because you belong with decent folks." Clara nodded, but inside, rebellion was growing. Jacob had made her feel like she might belong somewhere after all, like she might be worth something more than scraps and barn straw. The feeling was dangerous and wonderful and absolutely terrifying. From across the yard, she heard Jacob's laugh as he talked with Mr. Henderson about horses and cattle. The sound was rich and warm, like honey on fresh bread. It made her think of summer evenings and campfires and all the good things she'd lost when her father died. "Get inside and help me with the noon meal," Mrs. Henderson ordered. "And wash your hands. You look like you've been rolling in the dirt." Clara hurried inside, but as she pumped water into the wash basin, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror hanging on the wall. Her dark hair had escaped its braid, and her cheeks were flushed pink. For just a moment, she looked like a girl who might be worth talking to. A girl who might be worth something more than pity and charity. She touched her father's compass through the fabric of her dress, feeling its solid weight against her chest. "What would you think of him, Papa?" she whispered. "Would you like Jacob Reeves?" The compass seemed to grow warm under her touch, and Clara chose to take that as a sign. Maybe, just maybe, her luck was finally about to change. Lightning split the black sky above the Kansas prairie, followed by thunder that shook the barn walls like cannon fire. Clara pulled her thin blanket tighter around her shoulders as rain hammered against the roof. The storm had been raging for 2 hours, and water was starting to leak through the old boards above her head. 3 weeks had passed since Jacob arrived at the Henderson farm. 3 weeks of stolen glances across the yard, of conversations that lasted only seconds before Mrs. Henderson's sharp voice cut them short. 3 weeks of Clara lying awake at night, knowing Jacob was sleeping just 20 feet away in his small room at the other end of the barn. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Clara jump. She'd always been afraid of storms, ever since she was little. Her father used to hold her during the worst ones, telling her stories about brave knights and beautiful princesses, until she forgot to be scared. But now she was alone, and the storm felt like it was trying to tear the whole world apart. The barn door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold, wet air. Clara's heart stopped. Had Mrs. Henderson come to check on her? Had she done something wrong? But when she looked up, she saw Jacob standing in the doorway, holding a steaming cup and what looked like a heavy coat. "Thought you might be cold," he said, closing the door behind him. "This storm's a real monster. Clara scrambled to her feet, suddenly aware of how she must look in her old nightgown, with her hair hanging loose around her shoulders. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If Mrs. Henderson finds out." "She won't," Jacob said, walking closer. "She's sound asleep in that warm house of hers. Besides, I couldn't sleep knowing you were out here in this weather." He held out the cup, and Clara could smell coffee mixed with something sweet. "What is it?" she asked, taking the warm mug gratefully. "Coffee with a little honey and cream," Jacob said. "My mother used to make it for me when I was scared during storms." Clara took a sip, and the warm liquid spread through her chest like sunshine. She hadn't tasted anything so good in months. "Were you really scared of storms?" "Terrified," Jacob admitted with a smile. "Used to hide under my bed until my mother came to find me. She'd sit with me until I fell asleep." Another flash of lightning lit up the barn, followed immediately by thunder. Clara jumped again, spilling a little coffee on her nightgown. Jacob noticed her reaction, and his expression grew gentle. "Here," he said, unfolding the coat he'd brought. "This'll help keep you warm." The coat was thick and heavy, made of wool that smelled like leather and wood smoke. When Jacob settled it around her shoulders, Clara felt safer than she had in months. The coat was huge on her small frame, but it trapped her body heat and made her feel protected. "Thank you," she said, pulling the coat tighter. "But won't you be cold?" "I've got another blanket in my room," Jacob said. "Besides, I'm used to sleeping rough. You're not." They sat down on a pile of hay near the back wall, where the roof leaked less. Clara kept the coffee cup between her hands, enjoying the warmth. For a few minutes, they didn't talk, just listened to the storm rage outside. "Jacob," Clara said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why are you being so kind to me?" "I'm nobody special. I don't have anything to offer you." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was serious. "My mother died when I was 15. Fever, just like your father. After that, I was on my own. I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong anywhere." Clara looked at him in surprise. She'd never imagined that someone like Jacob, who seemed so strong and confident, had ever felt lost or alone. "I spent 2 years living rough, taking whatever work I could find. Most people looked at me like I was trash. But there was this one family, the Morgans, who took me in for a winter. They didn't have much, but they shared what they had. Mrs. Morgan used to say that kindness was free, but it was worth more than gold." "What happened to them?" Clara asked. "They moved to California, but I never forgot what they taught me, that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, no matter what their situation is." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Mrs. Henderson says I should be grateful for what I have, that I'm lucky they don't turn me out." "Mrs. Henderson is wrong," Jacob said firmly. "You're not lucky to be treated like a servant in your own home. You deserve better than scraps and a bed in a barn." "This isn't my home," Clara whispered. "I don't have a home." "Yes, you do," Jacob said. "Home isn't a place. It's the people who care about you. And I care about you, Clara." Clara's heart stopped. She stared at Jacob, hardly believing what she'd heard. "You do?" "More than I should, probably," Jacob said with a sad smile. "You're brave and smart and kind. You work harder than anyone I know, and you never complain. You're the strongest person I've ever met." "I don't feel strong," Clara said. "I feel scared all the time." "Being scared doesn't make you weak," Jacob said. "It makes you human. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid." Thunder crashed overhead again, but this time Clara didn't jump. She was too focused on Jacob's words, on the way he looked at her like she was someone worth listening to. "I found something last week," Clara said suddenly. "Something that might change everything." Jacob raised his eyebrows. "What kind of something?" Clara glanced toward the barn door, making sure they were still alone. Then she reached into her pile of belongings and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I was cleaning Mr. Henderson's office, and I saw these maps spread out on his desk. Railroad maps. I copied one of them." Jacob took the paper and unfolded it carefully. Even in the dim light of the barn, Clara could see his eyes widen as he studied her drawing. "This is incredible," he said. "You copied all these details from memory?" "I've always been good with maps," Clara said, feeling shy. "My father taught me how to read them when I was little. He said it was important to know where you were going." "Clara, This shows the railroad's planned route right through the heart of this county. They're going to buy up every farm between here and Dodge City." "I know," Clara said. "But look at this part here." She pointed to a section of her map. "There's another route south of here. It goes through rocky ground that's no good for farming, but it would work fine for railroad tracks. It would save the railroad money and save all these farms." Jacob stared at the map, then at Clara. "You figured this out on your own?" "I've been thinking about it for weeks. The railroad men are coming to town next month to start buying land. But if someone could show them this alternative route—" "Someone like you," Jacob said. "Someone like me doesn't get to talk to railroad men," Clara said bitterly. "I'm just a girl who sleeps in a barn." "You're a girl who might just save this entire county," Jacob said, "and I'm going to help you do it." Clara felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. "How?" "I don't know yet," Jacob admitted, "but we'll figure it out together. I promise." Outside, the storm was beginning to calm. The lightning was farther away now, and the thunder was just a distant rumble. Clara realized she wasn't afraid anymore. With Jacob beside her, she felt like she could face anything. "I should go back to my room," Jacob said reluctantly. "Don't want to cause you any trouble." "Thank you," Clara said, "for the coffee, and the coat, and everything." "Keep the coat," Jacob said. "You'll need it more than I will." He stood up and walked toward the door, then turned back. "Clara, that map you drew? It's the work of someone with a real gift. Don't let anyone tell you you're not smart enough or important enough to use it." After he left, Clara sat alone in the barn, wrapped in Jacob's coat and holding the empty coffee cup. For the first time since her father died, she felt like she might have a future that didn't involve scraps and barn straw and being grateful for crumbs. She pulled out her father's compass and held it in her palm. The needle pointed north, steady and sure, but Clara was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, her true direction wasn't north or south or east or west. Maybe her true direction was toward the life she was brave enough to build for herself. The morning sun painted the main street of Millbrook, Kansas, in shades of gold and amber as Clara walked beside Jacob toward the general store. It was market day, and the town was busier than usual. Farmers and their families filled the wooden sidewalks, their voices mixing with the sound of horses and wagon wheels on the dirt road. Clara's stomach was tight with nerves. This was her first trip to town since Jacob had arrived at the Henderson farm, and she felt like everyone was staring at her. In truth, most people barely glanced her way. She was just another poor girl in a worn dress, not worth a second look. "You're doing fine," Jacob said quietly, noticing her discomfort. "Just keep walking." They'd come to town on Mr. Henderson's orders to buy supplies and pick up the mail. But Clara had a secret reason for wanting to come. She'd heard that a man from the railroad company was staying at the hotel, and she wanted to see him for herself. She wanted to know what kind of person would destroy entire communities for money. The general store was crowded with customers. Mrs. Patterson, the store owner's wife, looked up when they entered. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Clara. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. "I thought the Henderson girl knew better than to show her face in decent company." Clara's cheeks burned, but Jacob stepped forward before she could speak. "Miss Brennan is here on business for Mr. Henderson," he said politely but firmly. "We need supplies from the list." Mrs. Patterson's expression didn't change, but she took the list Jacob offered. "I suppose she can wait outside while I fill this order. We don't need her kind handling the merchandise." "She's not going anywhere," Jacob said. His voice was still polite, but there was steel underneath. "Miss Brennan is a customer, same as anyone else." The store went quiet. Other customers turned to stare at the confrontation. Clara wanted to disappear, but Jacob's presence beside her gave her courage. "It's all right," Clara said softly. "I'll wait outside." "No," Jacob said. "You'll stay right here." Mrs. Patterson's face turned red. "I run a respectable business. I don't have to serve every stray that wanders in off the street." "You're absolutely right," said a new voice from the back of the store. "You don't have to serve strays, but you do have to serve paying customers." Everyone turned to see a well-dressed man in an expensive suit walking toward them. He was tall and thin, with gray hair and intelligent eyes. Clara had never seen him before, but something about his confident manner told her he was important. "And who might you be?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her tone suddenly uncertain. Robert Ashford, the man said, extending his hand to Jacob. I'm here representing the Kansas Pacific Railroad, and I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Clara's heart nearly stopped. This was the railroad man she'd heard about, the one who was going to buy up all the farms and destroy the community. He was standing right here, close enough to touch. Mr. Ashford, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice suddenly sweet as honey. What an honor to have you in my store. Please, let me know if there's anything I can do for you. As a matter of fact, there is, Ashford said. I'm looking for someone who knows this area well, someone who understands the land and the people. I was told I might find such a person here. Jacob and Clara exchanged glances. This was the moment Clara had been both hoping for and dreading. What exactly do you need to know? Jacob asked carefully. The railroad is planning to build through this county, Ashford said, but we want to make sure we choose the best route, one that serves everyone's interests. And by everyone, you mean the railroad, said a bitter voice from near the door. Clara turned to see Tom Bradley, a local farmer whose land sat directly in the path of the planned railroad route. His face was red with anger, and his hands were clenched into fists. Tom, Jacob said warningly, let's keep this civil. Civil? Tom spat. They want to steal my land, the land my father and grandfather worked, the land I'm planning to pass on to my sons. And you want me to be civil? Nobody's stealing anything, Ashford said calmly. We're offering fair market prices for the land we need. Fair? Tom's voice rose. You're offering half what the land is worth, and you know it. And if we don't sell, you'll just use the government to take it anyway. The tension in the store was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other customers were backing toward the door, not wanting to get caught in the middle of a fight. Clara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private, Ashford suggested. No, Tom said. I want everyone to hear this. I want them to know what kind of man you are. Tom, please, Clara said, stepping forward. Everyone turned to look at her in surprise. She was just a girl who slept in a barn. What could she possibly have to say about railroad business? The railroad needs to go somewhere, Clara continued, her voice growing stronger. People need to travel, and goods need to be shipped, but there might be a way to do it that doesn't destroy anyone's farm. Ashford's eyes sharpened with interest. Go on. Clara looked around the store, at all the faces watching her. Some were curious, some were hostile, and some were just confused. But Jacob was nodding encouragingly, and that gave her the courage to continue. What if there was another route, she said, one that went through land that wasn't good for farming, land that the railroad could buy cheap, without forcing anyone to give up their home? That's a nice dream, girl, Tom said sadly. But there is no other route. The railroad surveyors have been all over this county. They say this is the only way through. The surveyors might be wrong, Clara said. Sometimes the best route isn't the most obvious one. Ashford was studying Clara with new interest. You seem to know something about surveying, miss? Brennan, Clara said. Clara Brennan. Miss Brennan, are you suggesting that professional surveyors have missed something that you've noticed? Clara felt her confidence wavering. Put like that, it did sound ridiculous. Who was she to question trained professionals? But then she thought of her father, and the compass hanging around her neck, and all the nights she'd spent studying maps by lamplight. I'm suggesting that sometimes an outsider can see things that insiders miss, she said. And sometimes the best solutions come from people who think differently. This is ridiculous, Mrs. Patterson said. Why are we listening to a girl who doesn't even have a proper home? Because, Jacob said, stepping up beside Clara, sometimes the people who have the least to lose are the ones with the most to offer. Ashford nodded slowly. Miss Brennan, I'd like to hear more about this alternative route you mentioned. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow? At the hotel? Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Yes, she said. I'd be honored. Excellent. Shall we say 10 o'clock? She'll be there, Jacob said. After Ashford left, the store erupted in whispers. Clara could hear fragments of conversation. Who does she think she is? Just a barn girl trying to act important. Railroad man's probably just being polite. But Tom Bradley walked over to Clara, his expression serious. I don't know what you have in mind, girl, he said quietly. But if there's even a chance you can save our farms, I'm willing to listen. So am I, said Martha Collins, whose farm was also in the railroad's path. "My husband would roll over in his grave if I let them take our land without a fight." Soon, Clara was surrounded by a small group of farmers and their families. They were all looking at her with a mixture of hope and desperation. These were people who had worked their whole lives to build something, and now they were facing the loss of everything. "I can't promise anything," Clara said honestly, "but I'll do everything I can to help." As they walked back to the Henderson farm, Jacob was quiet. Finally, Clara couldn't stand it anymore. "You think I'm crazy, don't you?" she said. "Thinking I can outsmart professional surveyors." "I think you're brave," Jacob said, "and I think you're smart. And I think those surveyors might not know this land the way you do." "How can you be so sure?" Jacob stopped walking and turned to face her. "Because I've been watching you for weeks. I've seen how you notice things other people miss, how you remember details that everyone else forgets. You have a gift, Clara. And tomorrow, you're going to get the chance to use it." That night, Clara lay in her bed of hay, staring up at the barn roof. Tomorrow, she would meet with the railroad man. Tomorrow, she would either save her community or make a fool of herself in front of everyone. She pulled out her father's compass and held it in the moonlight streaming through the barn window. The needle pointed north, steady and true. But Clara was beginning to understand that true north wasn't just a direction on a map. It was the direction of your heart, the path toward the person you were meant to become. Tomorrow, she would find out if she had the courage to follow that path. "You're making a terrible mistake, Clara Brennan." Mrs. Henderson's voice echoed across the hotel lobby like a gunshot. Every head in the room turned to stare as the older woman marched toward Clara, her face red with fury. "Coming here pretending to be something you're not." Clara's hands shook as she stood near the grand staircase of the Millbrook Hotel. She'd arrived 10 minutes early for her meeting with Mr. Ashford, wearing her cleanest dress and Jacob's wool coat. Her father's compass hung around her neck, hidden beneath the fabric, giving her courage. But now Mrs. Henderson was here, and Clara felt like a little girl again, caught doing something wrong. "Ma'am, please lower your voice," the hotel clerk said nervously. "We have other guests." "Other guests?" Mrs. Henderson spun around. "This girl isn't a guest. She's nobody. She sleeps in our barn like an animal." The lobby fell silent. Clara could feel every eye in the room watching her. A well-dressed couple by the fireplace whispered to each other. A businessman reading a newspaper looked up with disgust. Even the hotel clerk seemed embarrassed for her. "Mrs. Henderson," Clara said quietly, fighting back tears, "I'm here on business. Important business." "Business?" The woman laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "What business could you possibly have? You're a charity case, Clara, a burden we took in out of Christian kindness. And this is how you repay us? By embarrassing our family name?" Clara's cheeks burned with shame. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear forever. But then she thought of Tom Bradley and Martha Collins and all the other farmers who were counting on her. She thought of Jacob's words, "Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid." "I'm trying to help people," Clara said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm trying to save their farms." "Save their farms?" Mrs. Henderson's voice rose even higher. "You can't even save yourself. You're nothing but a homeless orphan with delusions of importance." "That's enough." Jacob's voice cut through the lobby like a blade. He walked through the front door, his hat in his hands and his expression darker than a thunderstorm. "Mrs. Henderson, you need to leave now." "Don't you dare tell me what to do, Cowboy." Mrs. Henderson whirled around to face him. "This girl is my responsibility, and I won't have her making a fool of herself in public." "She's not making a fool of herself," Jacob said calmly. "She's trying to do something good, something brave, something you'd never understand." "How dare you!" Mrs. Henderson raised her hand as if to slap him, but Jacob caught her wrist, gently but firmly. "I wouldn't," he said quietly. "Not here, not to her, not ever." The tension in the lobby was thick enough to choke on. Clara could hear her own heart beating in her ears. She'd never seen Jacob look so dangerous, so protective. It scared her and thrilled her at the same time. "Miss Brennan?" A familiar voice interrupted the confrontation. Miss Ashford stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the scene with raised eyebrows. "I believe we have an appointment." Clara looked up at him, then back at Mrs. Henderson's furious face. This was her moment. She could apologize, walk away, and go back to her life of scraps and barn straw. Or she could climb those stairs and try to change everything. "Yes, sir," Clara said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "We do." She walked toward the stairs, her back straight and her chin high. Behind her, she heard Mrs. Henderson sputter with rage. "This isn't over, Clara Brennan. When you fail, don't come crying to us." Clara didn't turn around. She kept walking, one step at a time, toward the future she was going to build for herself. Mr. Ashford's hotel room was bigger than the entire barn where Clara slept. Rich red curtains hung from tall windows, and a fire crackled in a stone fireplace. Maps and papers covered a large wooden table in the center of the room. "Please, sit down," Ashford said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk, "and ignore what happened downstairs. I've learned that the loudest voices are often the least important." Clara sat carefully on the edge of the chair, trying not to wrinkle her dress. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Ashford." "Call me Robert," he said with a smile. "Now, tell me about this alternative route you mentioned." Clara took a deep breath and pulled out her hand-drawn map. "The railroad wants to build straight through the heart of the county, through the best farming land. But there's another way." She spread her map on the table next to Ashford's official surveys. 2 miles south of the planned route, there's a stretch of rocky ground. It's no good for farming, but it's perfect for railroad tracks. The grade is gentle. There are no major rivers to cross, and the land would be cheap to buy. Ashford studied both maps carefully. "This is remarkable work, Miss Brennan. But our surveyors have been all over this area. How did you discover something they missed?" "I grew up here," Clara said. "I've walked every inch of this land. I know where the water runs in spring, where the ground is solid, where the wildlife travels. Your surveyors probably spent a few weeks here. I've spent my whole life here." "And you drew this entire map from memory?" "Yes, sir. I've always been good with maps. My father taught me." Ashford leaned back in his chair. "I have to admit, your alternative route has some advantages. The land acquisition costs would be lower, and we'd face less opposition from local farmers. But there's one problem." Clara's heart sank. "What problem?" "The railroad board has already approved the current route. They've invested time and money in the surveys. Changing course now would require convincing some very stubborn men that a young woman from Kansas knows better than their trained professionals. But if it saves money and makes everyone happy, logic doesn't always win, Miss Brennan. Pride and politics often matter more." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been so sure her plan would work, so sure she could save the farms and prove her worth at the same time. "However," Ashford continued, "I believe your route has merit. If you're willing to take a risk, I have a proposition." "What kind of risk?" "The railroad board is meeting in Kansas City next week. If you could present your alternative route to them directly, in person, you might be able to change their minds. But it would mean leaving Millbrook, traveling to the city, and facing some very powerful men who don't like to be told they're wrong." Clara's mind raced. Kansas City was 100 miles away. She'd never been farther than the next county. The idea of facing a room full of important railroad men terrified her. I don't know if I can do that," she said honestly. "I think you can," Ashford said. "I think you're braver than you know, and I think your community needs someone brave enough to fight for them." "What if I fail?" "Then you'll have tried. And sometimes, trying is enough." Clara touched her father's compass through her dress. What would he have done? What would he have wanted her to do? "If I agree to go to Kansas City, will you support my plan?" "I'll do more than that," Ashford said. "I'll pay for your travel and lodging, and I'll make sure you have a fair hearing with the board." "Why would you do that for me?" "Because I've spent 20 years working for the railroad, and I've seen what happens when we steamroll over communities. It's time we tried a different approach." Clara stood up, her decision made. "I'll go to Kansas City. I'll present my plan." "Excellent. The meeting is next Wednesday. Can you be ready by Monday?" "I'll be ready." As Clara walked down the hotel stairs, she felt different. Taller, somehow, stronger. She'd just agreed to something that would have been impossible to imagine a week ago. She was going to Kansas City to fight for her community. Mrs. Henderson was waiting in the lobby, her face still red with anger. "So, did you make a fool of yourself?" "No, ma'am. Clara said calmly. I didn't. Then what happened? I am going to Kansas City to meet with the railroad board. Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open. For the first time in Clara's memory, the woman was speechless. Don't wait up for me, Clara said, walking toward the door. I have a lot of preparing to do. Outside, Jacob was waiting by the hitching post. How did it go? I'm going to Kansas City, Clara said, still hardly believing it herself. That's wonderful. When do you leave? Monday. Jacob, I'm scared. What if I can't do this? Jacob took her hands in his. You can do this. You're the smartest, bravest person I know, and I'll be right there with you. You're coming with me? Try to stop me, Jacob said with a grin. Someone needs to make sure you don't get lost in the big city. Clara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. She was going to Kansas City. She was going to fight for her community, and she wasn't going alone. As they walked back to the Henderson farm, Clara realized something had changed. She was no longer the girl who slept in the barn. She was Clara Brennan, and she had work to do. The Kansas City train station was a chaos of noise, smoke, and rushing people that made Clara's head spin. Steam engines hissed and whistled, their iron wheels screeching against the tracks. Passengers pushed past each other, carrying suitcases and shouting instructions. The air smelled of coal, smoke, and sweat, and something else Clara couldn't identify. Stay close, Jacob said, taking her arm as they stepped off the train. Cities can be dangerous for folks who don't know their way around. Clara nodded, clutching her small traveling bag and trying not to stare at everything around her. She'd never seen so many people in one place. Women in fancy dresses with bustles and feathers walked beside men in expensive suits. Children ran between the crowds, some dressed in fine clothes, others in rags. It was like a whole world existed inside this one building. Miss Brennan? A young man in a clean blue uniform approached them. I'm Thomas from the railroad company. Mr. Ashford sent me to collect you. Thank you, Clara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Your hotel is just a few blocks away. The meeting with the board is tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. As they rode through the city in a horse-drawn carriage, Clara pressed her face to the window. Buildings rose 4 and 5 stories high, taller than anything she'd ever imagined. Signs hung from every storefront. Fine hats and gloves, fresh oysters daily, rooms for rent. People filled the wooden sidewalks, more people than lived in all of Millbrook. It's something, isn't it? Jacob said, watching her reaction. It's overwhelming, Clara admitted. How do people live like this? So crowded, so noisy? Different folks need different things, Jacob said. Some people like the excitement. Others prefer the quiet of farm country. Which do you prefer? Jacob looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I prefer being wherever you are. The Grand Kansas Hotel was grander than anything Clara had ever seen. The lobby had a ceiling painted with angels and flowers, and the floors were covered in thick carpets that felt like clouds under her feet. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbows of light across the walls. Mr. Ashford has arranged rooms for you on the 3rd floor, Thomas said, handing them each a key. Dinner is served until 8 o'clock. The meeting tomorrow is in the railroad building, just 2 blocks from here. Clara's room was bigger than the entire Henderson farmhouse. A bed with 4 posts and silk curtains stood against one wall. A writing desk sat by a tall window that looked out over the city. There was even a private washroom with hot and cold running water. I don't belong here, Clara whispered to herself, looking around at all the luxury. Someone knocked on her door. Clara? It's Jacob. Are you all right? Clara opened the door to find Jacob standing in the hallway, looking as out of place as she felt. His room was across the hall from hers, and she could see it was just as fancy as her own. I keep thinking someone's going to realize we're not supposed to be here, she said. We're here because we earned the right to be here, Jacob said firmly. You have something important to say, and these railroad men need to hear it. What if they don't listen? What if they laugh at me? Then we'll go home knowing we tried. But Clara, I don't think they're going to laugh. I think they're going to be impressed. That evening, they ate dinner in the hotel restaurant. Clara had never seen so many forks and spoons at one place setting. She watched other diners to see which utensils to use, trying not to embarrass herself. The food was fancy, but not as good as the simple meals she'd grown up with. Tell me about the meeting tomorrow, Jacob said as they shared a piece of chocolate cake. Mr. Ashford says there will be 6 men on the board. They're all wealthy, all powerful, and all used to getting their way. I have to convince them that a girl from Kansas knows better than their trained surveyors. You do know better. You have something they don't have. What's that? You understand the people who live on the land. You know what it means to lose everything. They just see numbers on a map. Clara nodded, but her stomach was still full of butterflies. Tomorrow would decide everything. The next morning, Clara stood outside the railroad building, wearing her best dress and Jacob's coat. Her father's compass hung around her neck, hidden but comforting. The building was made of red brick and rose 6 stories into the sky. Men in expensive suits walked in and out, all of them looking important and busy. Remember, Jacob said, straightening her collar, you belong here. You have every right to be here. I wish you could come with me. I'll be waiting right here when you come out, no matter what happens. Clara nodded and walked through the front doors. The lobby was all marble and gold, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Her footsteps echoed as she walked to the elevator, a magical box that carried people between floors. The boardroom was on the 6th floor, at the end of a long hallway lined with portraits of stern-looking men. Clara paused outside the door, took a deep breath, and knocked. "Come in," called a voice from inside. The room was dark and imposing, with heavy wooden furniture and thick curtains. 6 men sat around a large table, all of them looking at Clara with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed impatience. Mr. Ashford sat at the far end of the table, and he smiled encouragingly when he saw her. "Gentlemen," Ashford said, "this is Miss Clara Brennan, the young woman I told you about." "Miss Brennan," said a man with gray whiskers and cold eyes. "I'm Chairman Morrison. I understand you have some concerns about our planned route through your county." "Yes, sir," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I believe there's a better way." "A better way?" Another man laughed. "Young lady, we've spent months surveying that area. We've employed the best engineers money can buy. What could you possibly know that they don't?" Clara felt her confidence wavering. These men were looking at her like she was a child playing dress-up. But then she thought of Tom Bradley and Martha Collins and all the other farmers who were counting on her. "I know the land," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I know every hill and valley, every stream and rock formation. I know where the ground is solid and where it's soft, where the water runs in spring and where it's dry in summer. Your surveyors spent a few weeks in our county. I've spent my whole life there." "That's very touching," Morrison said dismissively. "But we need facts, not feelings." Clara reached into her bag and pulled out her hand-drawn map. "These are facts, sir. This alternative route would save you money, reduce construction time, and avoid forcing dozens of families from their homes." She spread the map on the table, and despite their skepticism, the men leaned forward to look. Clara began to explain her route, pointing out the advantages and addressing their concerns. As she talked, she could see their expressions changing from dismissive to interested. "The land acquisition costs would be 30% lower," she said. "The grade is gentler, which means less work for your construction crews. And you'd have the support of the local community instead of their opposition." "This is remarkable work," said one of the younger board members. "Where did you learn to draw maps like this?" "My father taught me," Clara said. "He believed that understanding the land was the key to understanding everything else." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Morrison said, his tone softer now. "What did he do for a living?" "He was a farmer," Clara said. "He died of fever last spring." The room fell silent. Clara could see the men looking at her with new eyes, seeing not just a girl with a map but a young woman who'd lost everything and was still fighting for her community. "Miss Brennan," Morrison said finally, "your alternative route has merit. But changing our plans at this stage would be expensive and complicated. Are you certain this route is feasible?" "I'd stake my life on it," Clara said without hesitation. "That's quite a commitment," Morrison said. "What would you say if I told you we were willing to send a survey team to examine your route? And if they confirm your findings, we'll consider changing our plans?" Clara's heart leaped. "I'd say that's all I could ask for." "Then it's settled. We'll have a team in your county within the month." As Clara walked out of the boardroom, she felt like she was floating. She'd done it. She'd actually convinced them to listen, to consider her plan. She might have just saved every farm in the county. Jacob was waiting in the lobby, just as he'd promised. When he saw her face, he broke into a huge grin. "You did it, didn't you? They're sending a survey team to check my route," Clara said, hardly believing it herself. "I'm so proud of you," Jacob said, pulling her into a hug. "You're amazing." "I couldn't have done it without you," Clara said. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." "I'll always believe in you," Jacob said softly. "Always." As they walked back to the hotel, Clara realized something had changed inside her. She was no longer the scared girl who slept in a barn. She was Clara Brennan, and she had just stood up to some of the most powerful men in the country and won. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we go home," Jacob said, "and we wait to see if the survey team confirms what we already know. And if they do, then you'll have saved your community and proved that sometimes the best solutions come from the people who care the most." Clara smiled, feeling her father's compass warm against her chest. She was going home, but she was a different person than the one who'd left. She was someone who mattered, someone who could make a difference, someone who belonged. "They're coming. The railroad men are coming." Young Billy Henderson ran through the streets of Millbrook, his voice carrying across the morning air like a church bell. From every doorway, people emerged to see what the commotion was about. 3 wagons full of them, with all kinds of equipment. Clara stood in the Hendersons' front yard, hanging laundry on the line. When she heard the news, her heart nearly stopped. It had been 2 weeks since she'd returned from Kansas City. 2 weeks of waiting and wondering if the railroad board would keep their promise. 2 weeks of Mrs. Henderson's cold silence and suspicious looks. "Clara!" Jacob came running from the barn, his face flushed with excitement. "Did you hear? The survey team is here." "I heard," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. But inside, her stomach was doing flip-flops. What if the surveyors disagreed with her route? What if they proved her wrong in front of the whole town? What if she'd gotten everyone's hopes up for nothing? "This is your moment," Jacob said, taking her hands. "Everything you've worked for comes down to this." From the front porch, Mrs. Henderson watched them with narrowed eyes. "Don't get your hopes up, girl," she called out. "Dreams have a way of turning into nightmares." But Clara wasn't listening to Mrs. Henderson anymore. She was watching the main road, where 3 wagons were approaching in a cloud of dust. The lead wagon carried surveying equipment, tripods, measuring chains, and instruments she didn't recognize. Behind it came 2 more wagons, filled with men in work clothes and wide-brimmed hats. "Word spreading fast," Jacob said, pointing down the road. "Look." Clara could see people walking toward town from all directions. Tom Bradley rode past on his horse, tipping his hat to Clara as he went. Martha Collins hurried by with her 2 youngest children, both of them dressed in their Sunday best. Even old Mr. Peterson, who rarely left his farm, was making his way toward the main street. "They're all counting on me," Clara whispered, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "No," Jacob said firmly. "You're all counting on each other. That's what makes a community." By the time Clara and Jacob reached the town square, a crowd had gathered. The survey team was setting up their equipment near the general store, while their leader, a tall man with a thick mustache, studied a map. Clara recognized him from the descriptions she'd heard. This was Samuel Wright, the railroad's chief surveyor. "Mr. Wright?" Mayor Peterson stepped forward, his voice carrying across the square. "Welcome to Millbrook. I trust you had a safe journey?" "Safe enough," Wright replied, not looking up from his map. "Now, I understand there's been some discussion about an alternative route for our railroad." "That's right," the mayor said. "We have a young woman here who's made quite a study of the local terrain." Wright finally looked up, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Clara. She felt her cheeks burn as every person in the square turned to stare at her. "You must be Miss Brennan," Wright said, walking over to her. "I've heard interesting things about your suggestions." Clara could hear the skepticism in his voice. This man had probably been surveying for 20 years, and here was a girl who'd never been to school trying to tell him his job. "Yes, sir," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I believe there's a better route for your railroad. Do you now?" Wright's expression was hard to read. "And what makes you think you know better than trained professionals?" Before Clara could answer, Tom Bradley stepped forward. "Because she knows this land better than anyone alive. She's walked every inch of it, studied every hill and valley. If Clara says there's a better way, then there's a better way." "I appreciate your confidence in the young lady," Wright said. But I'll need to see evidence, not just testimonials. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out her hand-drawn map. This shows the alternative route I proposed to the railroad board. It goes through rocky ground south of here, avoiding all the good farmland. Wright took the map and studied it carefully. His eyebrows rose as he examined the details. This is remarkably detailed work. You drew this yourself? Yes, sir. Every line and measurement. Impressive. But paper is one thing, Miss Brennan. The actual land is another. Would you be willing to guide my team along this route? To show us what you've mapped? Clara's heart pounded. This was it. The moment of truth. I'd be honored to. Good. We'll start tomorrow at dawn. I hope you're prepared for a long day of walking. I'm ready, Clara said. As the crowd began to disperse, Clara noticed a familiar figure standing near the hotel. Robert Ashford had come to Millbrook to witness the survey himself. He caught her eye and nodded encouragingly. You did well, Jacob said as they walked home. Wright seemed impressed by your map. Being impressed by a map is different from being impressed by the actual land, Clara said. What if I'm wrong? What if the route won't work? Then we'll figure out another way, Jacob said. But, Clara, I don't think you're wrong. I think you're about to change everything. That evening, Clara sat in the barn, reviewing her map by lamplight. She'd drawn every detail from memory. But what if she'd missed something? What if there was a problem she hadn't considered? Can't sleep? Jacob appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee. I keep thinking about tomorrow, Clara said, accepting the warm cup gratefully. What if I've made a mistake? You haven't made a mistake, Jacob said, sitting beside her on the hay. You know this land better than anyone. Trust yourself. It's not just about the land, Clara said. It's about proving that someone like me can make a difference. If I fail tomorrow, I'll always be just the girl who slept in the barn. Clara, Jacob said softly, you already are more than that. You've already proven yourself. Tomorrow is just about showing other people what I've known all along. What's that? That you're extraordinary. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I love you, Jacob Reeves. I love you too, Clara Brennan. And tomorrow, I'm going to watch you save this entire community. As Clara finally drifted off to sleep, wrapped in Jacob's coat and holding her father's compass, she dreamed of railroad tracks stretching across the prairie, carrying hope and progress, without destroying the homes and dreams of the people she'd grown to love. The morning mist clung to the prairie grass like ghostly fingers as Clara led the survey team across the rolling hills south of Millbrook. Samuel Wright walked beside her, his long legs easily keeping pace with her shorter stride. Behind them, 4 other surveyors followed, carrying equipment and making notes in leather-bound books. Tell me about this outcropping, Wright said, pointing to a ridge of rock that rose from the grassland like the spine of a sleeping giant. It's limestone, Clara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The rock is solid all the way through, perfect for supporting heavy railroad tracks and trains. Wright nodded, making a note in his book. And the grade? Less than 2%, Clara replied. Much gentler than the route through the valley. They'd been walking for 3 hours, and Clara's confidence was growing with each step. Every landmark was exactly where her map said it would be. Every measurement matched her calculations. The land was revealing its secrets to the surveyors, just as Clara had hoped. Remarkable, muttered Thompson, one of the younger surveyors. The girl's calculations are spot on. Miss Brennan, Wright corrected him. Show some respect. Clara felt a warm glow of pride. Even Wright was defending her now. They stopped for lunch beside a small stream that wound through the rocky ground. Clara sat on a fallen log, eating a sandwich Jacob had packed for her that morning. The surveyors spread out their equipment, taking measurements and checking elevations. Miss Brennan, Wright said, settling beside her on the log. I have to ask, where did you learn to read land like this? My father taught me, Clara said. He used to say that the land talks to you if you know how to listen. Your father sounds like a wise man. What did he do for a living? He was a farmer. He died of fever last spring. Wright nodded solemnly. I'm sorry for your loss. But he taught you well. I've been surveying for 22 years, and I've never seen anyone read terrain like you do. Does that mean? Clara's voice caught in her throat. It means your alternative route is not only feasible, it's superior to our original plan. The railroad will save money, time, and avoid displacing dozens of families. You've done something remarkable here, Miss Brennan. Clara felt tears of joy stream down her face. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. There's more, Wright continued. I'm going to recommend to the railroad board that they hire you as a consulting surveyor. The company could use someone with your skills and knowledge. Clara's mouth fell open. You mean a real job? With the railroad? A real job with real pay. $60 a month. Plus expenses. You'd travel to different sites, help plan routes, work with engineering teams. What do you say? Clara's mind raced. $60 a month was more money than she'd ever imagined having. She could buy her own clothes, her own food, her own house. She'd never have to sleep in a barn again. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. As they walked back toward town, Clara's head spun with possibilities. She could travel, see new places, use her skills to help build the railroad. She could be independent, respected, valued. But what about Jacob? What about the community that had finally accepted her? What about the home she was just beginning to build? The sun was setting by the time they reached Millbrook. A crowd had gathered in the town square, waiting for news. Clara could see the hope and worry in their faces. Farmers and shopkeepers and families who'd been holding their breath for weeks. Well, Tom Bradley stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. What's the verdict? Wright stepped onto the wooden platform in front of the general store. Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement. After a thorough survey of the alternative route proposed by Miss Clara Brennan, I'm pleased to report that the railroad will be adopting her plan. The crowd erupted in cheers. Clara found herself surrounded by people hugging her, shaking her hand, patting her back. She saw tears in Martha Collins' eyes, relief on Tom Bradley's face, pride in Mayor Peterson's expression. You did it! Jacob appeared at her side, lifting her off her feet in a spinning hug. You saved everyone! We did it, Clara corrected him. We all did it together. As the celebration continued around them, Clara pulled Jacob aside. I need to tell you something. Mr. Wright offered me a job. A real job with the railroad. Jacob's face went through a series of emotions. Surprise, pride, and then something that looked like sadness. That's wonderful, Clara. You deserve it. It would mean traveling. Being away from here. Being away from you. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. What do you want to do? I don't know, Clara admitted. I've dreamed of having a real job, of being independent, but I've also dreamed of having a home, a family, a place where I belong. Clara, Jacob said softly, I can't make this decision for you, but I can tell you this. Whatever you choose, I'll support you. If you want to take the job, I'll be proud of you. If you want to stay here, I'll be grateful. And if I want both? Jacob smiled. Then we'll figure out how to make both work. As the crowd began to disperse, Clara stood in the town square, looking around at the faces of people who'd become her family. She thought about her father and what he'd want for her. She thought about the compass around her neck and the direction it had been pointing her all along. Mr. Wright, she called out as the surveyor prepared to leave. About that job offer. Yes? I'm interested, but I have some conditions. Wright raised his eyebrows. What kind of conditions? I want to be based here in Millbrook. I want to work on projects that help communities, not hurt them. And I want to bring my assistant. Your assistant? Clara looked at Jacob, who was grinning from ear to ear. Jacob Reeves. He's the best horseman and the most dependable person I know. If you want me, you get both of us. Wright considered this for a moment, then nodded. I think we can arrange that. Welcome to the railroad, Miss Brennan. Both of you. As the surveyors packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, Clara walked to the edge of town, looking out over the prairie where the new railroad would run. The route she'd drawn would bring progress and prosperity to the region without destroying the lives of the people who lived here. Jacob joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. So what now? Now we build something new, Clara said. A railroad, a future, a life together. And the house? Clara smiled, thinking of the barn where she'd spent so many cold nights. I think it's time I moved into the house. The real house. With you. The house feels empty without you, Jacob said softly, echoing the words he'd spoken weeks ago in the barn. Then let's fill it, Clara replied. With love, with laughter, with the life we're going to build together. As they walked back toward town, Clara pulled out her father's compass one last time. The needle pointed north, steady and true. But Clara realized she no longer needed it to find her direction. She'd found her true north in the love of a good man, the respect of her community, and the knowledge that she could make a difference in the world. The girl who'd slept in the barn was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who'd claimed her place in the world, and who was ready to build a future as bright as the Kansas sky.